Welcome to the finals of the 2022 Chinese New Year Cup Championship. 8 drivers are up against each other in 5 different races. We start with the road race on a sprint. 6 drivers have chosen the CC8S, which is a rear-wheel drive power build, so they will have a slow launch, and all-wheel drive FXX gets away quickly. But for how long? Collisions are turned off in all races, so all that matters is the driver's pace and consistency. 25 seconds into the race and Powerbirds are already catching up, but will they have enough handling for the corners? Neptune has already managed to pull a gap to the other Koenigseggs, and he is absolutely pushing his car to the limit. He loses on these corners, but there will be more straights. This is a close race in the middle of the pack, and drivers are already swapping places very quickly. Switching to G1 Throne point of view, we can see that he is currently in 5th place. Dark Repulsor going for an overtake. He does make the pass, but he goes too wide into the corner, slightly tapping the wall and slowing him down, with G1 Throne remaining in 5th position. This track is mostly straights and high-speed corners. The CC8S has more power, but the FXX will have an advantage on the corners, so this should be really close. The conditions on this track are very wet, which makes it more difficult for Powerbuild's drivers to control, but shouldn't be too much of a problem for all-wheel drive vehicles. We now enter the last braking zone. Rock LXD's FXX has lost 3 position on the straight. Will he be able to take them back on the next few corners? Doesn't look like it. The Koenigseggs are pulling away from him onto the final corner. G1 Throne makes a mistake and Rock LXD takes his position, but he doesn't have the power and G1 Throne takes it back. That concludes our first race. Here is how the points are calculated according to positions. We now enter the second race, which is another road race, but it is circuit based. There are 5 laps and everyone has chosen the Lotus Elise GT1. Except me, don't ask. Off the line we go. All cars in this race are rear-wheel drive and everyone gets a similar launch. The cars are aero-based and placed somewhere between balance builds and handling builds. Onto the first corner, and that's way too wide. This was enough for everyone to pass me, so we switched to their point of view. Now we move up towards the town. This section can be annoying thanks to all the bumps and props. As you can see, D-God hits a pole and gets slowed down, and because of this, the first 3 drivers are really close to each other now. Rock LXD is in the lead as we go into the final braking zone. There is a big elevation change on this corner, but this is where these cars really shine, and the aerodynamics will keep them on the ground. Rock LXD is in the lead, but D-God has a slightly better exit. On to the next lap, you can take the first corner pretty much flat out, but here comes the first braking zone. D-God goes for a wider line and it pays off for him. Rock LXD and D-God are overlapping each other now after the corner, and Neptune is following them very closely. Here comes the town again. Fun fact, if your car overlaps with someone else, you both can go through the props. But despite this, Rock LXD hits the pole, which costs him a lot of speed and allows Neptune to pass him. Onto the final braking zone, the last 6 drivers are so close to each other. This is Forza at its peak. All drivers took the final corners very well, and now we move on to the 3rd lap. Up in front, Neptune is still chasing D-God onto the first corner again, and all drivers receive very similar exits. Except for Dark, he is almost overlapping Rock LXD now. We are now back in town. These drivers are absolutely destroying this area, and there are props flying all over the place. And the props they hit, they affect the drivers on the back as well. They will hit the debris, which can also slow them down, or even kill them because the game has amazing physics. Anyway, Neptune is now overlapping D-God. The other drivers are a bit more spread, but it's still very close. Dark had a very good lap and is up to 3rd place, followed by Eternal. We now move on to the 4th lap. Let's see the first corner, and RockLXD takes it way too safely. G1 Throne overtakes him. Now let's see the first braking zone. Neptune just manages to overtake D-God, but will he manage to keep it? D-God goes way too wide, but he recovers very quickly and Neptune hits the pole. The battle for first place is still on. Neptune trying to get a better line, hits the boxes which makes him lose speed. It's very close as they are ghosting through the poles. D-God takes back the lead, but not by much. On to the final braking zone and Neptune gets a better exit, but he taps the wall and this slows him down quite a bit. D-God manages to overtake him again. The final lap is coming up. It's really tense between these two drivers. Will Neptune gamble it or will D-God make a mistake? It all comes down to this lap. Now approaching the first braking zone and Neptune gets a much better exit. Neptune is in first place and all he has to do is avoid props. Unfortunately, the spot has decided to change the view to the mid-pack. Dark crashes into the tyre wall and basically dies. That's race over for him. Neptune did not survive the props as well and he falls back to 2nd place. It all comes down to this corner. Out of the final braking zone, but D-God hits the wall. Neptune with a much better exit takes first place, and that is race number 2 finished. And if you take a look at the lap times, they are all within 4/10 of each other. Moving on to race 3, which is a dirt race. 4 drivers are in the Porsche 917, which is the fastest car, and there are 4 drivers in the Supervan, which is much more stable. Off the line we go. The Porsches have much better acceleration, but the Supervans have more grip on the small road section. But one of the other pros of the Supervan is that it's big and does a good job at blocking other drivers' visions. Anyway, onto the first hairpin, and we already have some drivers hitting the walls. We now enter the second road section, which you can cut by going onto the grass. And you can see RockLXD almost hitting the wall there because he couldn't cut the turn. Moving off-road, this part is bumpy and really easy to lose control on, especially in the Porsche. Onto the long hairpin. Drivers are close, but much more spread than the previous race. This chicane is very tricky. You can miss a checkpoint or hit a wall on the exit. RockLXD takes that really well and closes in on to the pack in front. Here is a tricky braking zone. You have to side your car through the corner and at the same time avoid going too wide to set up for the next corner. There is a small jump before the final corner, and after that we move on to the main straight where the Porsches have a power advantage. On to lap 2, and in the mid-pack we have Dark, G1 Throne and Leia in the Supervans. It's already becoming clear which car choice was faster, but will the Porsche drivers be able to avoid mistakes until the end of the race? The Supervans can get away with not cutting the corner here thanks to their road grip. Drivers are now much more spread out, as you can see on the minimap. We enter the off-road section again, onto the long hairpin. And it looks like G1 Throne is going to overtake Dark. Dark hits the wall. G1 Throne has quite a bit of a ground to catch up if he wants to make it to the top 3. D-God makes a mistake and the top 3 drivers are now in the Porsche. Close battle between Neptune, me and Rock. Let's see how it is going to turn out. Neptune gets a wider and better line into the final corner and manages to slightly pull ahead, and now we enter the 3rd lap. Onto the first hairpin, RockLXD takes the inside line and I hit the wall, but no! RockLXD misses a checkpoint. This is so sad. Anyways, it's only me and Neptune in the top 2 with a pretty large gap to 3rd place. Neptune has managed to extend his lead. Let's see how the long hairpin is going to turn out. Neptune goes too wide and loses his slide. I take the corner nicely and manage to close the gap a little. Neptune gets a great entry and a good exit. I hit the wall and Neptune is pulling away again. Onto the big braking zone. Neptune gets a more inside line, which sets him up better for the next corner. Going for the small jump. Again, hitting the wall with the love tap after the jump, but no reduction in speed. It could be worse. Onto the fourth lap, and the gap is still pretty much the same. Onto the first corner. Looks like I take it slightly better. Now onto the hairpin. Neptune going for the inside line, which is slightly slower, but also safer. We both managed to cut onto the grass. The tyres on the dirt cars have more grip off-road than they have on the road, so it gives you more rotation. Back onto the dirt again, and I'm losing control of the car. Onto the long hairpin, and I go too wide, but it doesn't matter because Neptune is going to miss a checkpoint. And it's basically an automatic win for me, so we move on to the middle of the pack. Rock LXD has made a great recovery and is already back at position 4. There are 2 supervans in front of him and another lap to go. He can overtake them both, but he really needs to push the car. Going a bit wide entering this corner, but manages to set the car up nicely. Onto the final corner, and he is able to easily out-accelerate one of the supervans. Neptune is also right behind them. We are in the final lap now, and Rock LXD has set a new fastest lap time. He crashes out of the first corner and allows G1 Throne to catch up a bit. But he will hold his position, and he now only has Dark in front of him. Going for the cut, doesn't quite get it, but manages to keep all of his speed. He gets a nice entry as he enters the dirt section. Onto the long hairpin, Rock LXD taps the wall, but he gets a great exit nonetheless. Onto this tricky corner, Dark is playing it too safe. There are only 3 corners to go. Rock LXD hits the wall, but not too hard and doesn't lose much speed. Dark goes too wide, which gives him a bad line onto the next corner. This allows Rock LXD to finally overtake him in the final corner. Rock takes second place, followed by Dark. Neptune almost caught up to G1 Throne and finishes 1/10 of a second behind him. And that is it for the third race. On to the fourth race, which is a cross-country circuit in A-Class. Everyone except me goes for the Maserati ACTF. While ACTF is the fastest car, it's much more unstable. You basically have to pray not to crash, since it's all over the place on bumper sections. Looks like Neptune gets a better launch than G1 Throne. The first corner, you have to go wide and slide your car through it. Now we enter the most deadly part of this track, which is the big jump. Neptune hits the wall, which slows him down a bit. It allows Rock LXD to pass him. Rock LXD hits some of the props, which allows Neptune to catch up again. It's getting bumpy and Neptune has to slow down and play it safe. There is a small jump here, followed by a corner, which leads to the second big jump on this track. I'm taking a pretty wide line. Rock is playing it safe, but he is catching up nonetheless, thanks to ACTF's superior grip. Onto the final corner, Rock LXD takes the inside line and overtakes me, but I get a better exit and catch up to him on the jump. ACTF bounces up a few times and Rock LXD slows down a bit to restabilize his car. There is another jump which leads to the next lap. The Jeep and the ACTFs have very similar acceleration here, and we move on to the first corner. Rock LXD barely gets that checkpoint and overtakes me. Is he going to survive the jump? Yes, he will. I go too wide after the jump, and that is it. Rock LXD is gone. The other drivers are closing in. We don't have their perspective at the moment, so you have to bear with me for a few seconds. There we go. Internal, Leo, and Digon are having a close battle. Onto the big jump. Leo goes for the wide line. They take very different lines, but the gap remains pretty much the same. In theory, the wider line should be faster, but it's also more risky, so you need to pull it off very carefully. Onto the final straight we go. Onto the final jump, but Leo hits the wall That's a big mistake and it costs him 2 positions. Despite that, the 5 drivers in the middle pack are still relatively close as we enter the 3rd lap. There is a larger gap compared to the road races, but also there is more room for mistakes. Let's see the first corner. All drivers get similar exits. Onto the big jump, and no one dies surprisingly. Everyone gets a pretty good exit. G1 Throne taking a wide line, which puts him in side by side to Leo. G1 Throne overtakes him, but he loses control of his car. Leo takes his position back. Someone hits the signs, which on this track, they don't respawn and can cause trouble for later. Onto the second big jump. D-God has closed his gap to me, but he slides too much, which costs him a lot of speed. He's still managing to keep ahead of the pack behind him. He keeps his car stable through the final straight, and we move on to lap 4. Rock LXD still has a solid line onto the big jump, and no! Rock LXD flips over. The game decided to say no, and he falls back to 3rd place despite having a pretty good lead. You just hate to see it. Is he now going to risk it and push his car, or play it safe and keep this position? He is now in a battle with D-God and Eternal. He hits the prop and loses speed, and Eternal overtakes him. Eternal almost losing control of his car through the small jump, but he manages to save it. D-God goes way too wide as we enter the second big jump, but no! Rock LXD's car bounces up too much and he is off the track. It appears the same thing almost happened to Leo. There is now a close battle for the second place between Eternal, D-God and Dark. You probably can't see them with this quality. Unfortunately, this is the best I got, so bear with me through this last straight until we enter the final lap. And now we move on to the final lap. No one has changed positions and we enter the first corner. Looks like everyone gets through equally, and now for the big jump. Save touchdown for D-God, but he is going to bounce up a second time and goes too wide. He hits some of the signs and allows Eternal to overtake him. Eternal is going to get slowed down by the props, but it's not enough for D-God to catch up to him. Looking at the mid-pack, Neptune is going to hit the wall. This race is not going well for him as well. Onto the second big jump for one last time. Everyone is going to survive. The gap in the top 5 is still relatively small, but there is only one corner left to go. The final positions should be the same unless someone makes a big mistake on the last straight. And it looks like everyone is going to keep their position, which wraps up race 4. The stable Jeep takes the victory despite having a much slower lap time. There is only one race left to go, which is a cross-country sprint. Everyone has chosen the Mercedes S-Class, which is the best overall cross-country vehicle besides Scout. But the Scout is banned, so the choice was obvious. Let's see how this race turns out. Coming out of the first corner, no one exchanging positions, everyone's keeping their starting grid position, but there is a big jump coming up which can turn the tables. Neptune having a better exit, and here we go. Everyone survives, but the VRAM bug kicks in and kills me anyways. Neptune with an excellent line, he gets a much better exit speed and overtakes everyone else. He is up to first, going to take a very inside line here. From what I've seen, the line doesn't make a big difference for this corner. In the end, looks like everyone keeps their position they had prior to corner entry. Leo goes too wide and the slide makes him lose a lot of speed. It's best to keep the car in 4th gear here since the 5th gear is way too long. Onto the final corner, drivers are still very close, but there is a big jump coming up. Let's see if it claims any victims. And here we go. Oh no! Neptune spins out and Rocket XD is going to hit the props. Everyone else survives, and that concludes the final race and the championship. Drivers are all within less than 4 seconds of each other, which is amazing. This was the final race. There are prizes for the top 4 drivers. Here are the final results. I win with 69 points, which was totally calculated. Eternal takes 2nd place with 59 points, and Neptune was just 1 point less, takes 3rd, and finally Dark takes 4th, and that was everything. This was a fun tournament for me, and I hope you guys had fun watching it too. Goodbye.